Hey guys, I'm Tony Tian, and if you're new to this channel, I'm second year medical student at University of Taiwan. So today I'm gonna do a summary of cardiac cycle, and basically, cardiac cycle is just how your heart contracts and relaxes. That's how you feel the heartbeat, and the dun dun sound. Okay, so we're gonna talk about why you feel the dun dun sound and some of the other aspects as well. Cool. So before we start, we're gonna just do a quick run through of the anatomy, and I hope you guys already know a thing or two about it. So basically, you have the right and left atrium and the left and right ventricles, right? And the venous blood drains into the atrium, and then it goes into the ventricles, and then it gets ejected through the ventricles into the arteries. And the arteries and the veins are not necessarily carrying oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. For example, in your systematic veins, in your inferior and superior vena cava, it carries deoxygenated blood, whereas in your pulmonary vein, it carries oxygenated blood because it just comes out fresh from your lung. So for your pulmonary artery, it carries this deoxygenated, and for your aortic artery, it carries this oxygenated blood. Okay. Right, so now let's talk about the actual contraction. So there's the systole phase and the diastole phase. And systole, basically, just think about it as contraction, and diastole as relaxation. So if you go into details, there's an atrial systole and atrial diastole, and the ventricular systole and the ventricular diastole. But usually when we talked about the systole and the diastole of the heart, we talked about the ventricular systole and diastole because that's where the major contraction is happening. And the systole of the atrium, the contraction of the atrium has very minimal effect on the entire cardiac cycle. Right, so the very first step of the entire cardiac cycle is that the venous blood needs to return to the atrium. So we're gonna start by talking about the atrial refill. So basically, the entire atrial refill process is a very passive process, and when the atria actually contract, only about 20% of the blood is ejected into the ventricles by this contraction, and the rest 80% of the blood is all being passive, which is why when people have atrial fibrillation, they're not gonna go into cardiac arrest or go into fainting. They just feel this palpitation in their hearts, but it does lead into other consequences, which can be a little bit more nasty. And this is the filling of the heart. This is diastolic phase, and your heart is going to get gradually filled up until the diastole finishes, until your heart is going to start to contract. And at this point, all the blood volume in your heart is something we call a end diastolic volume. Okay, and then your heart is going to squeeze all the blood out, and then your ventricles is almost going to be empty. And then after all the blood is into the shoots into the aorta, the aortic blood is trying to drop back, but then we have the aortic valve that's stopping the blood from going back. So the valve is gonna shut like this, slapping onto each other, and then creating a isovolumetric space for the inside of the ventricle, and this is the phase that we call the isovolumetric relaxation, because the volume is not changing. Isovolumetric, yep. And this is so when the aortic valves shuts together, this is the mark of the end of the systole phase of your cardiac cycle. And at this point, there's going to be very little blood in your heart, but there's still going to be a little bit, and this is what we call a end systolic volume. And the difference between the EDV and the ESV, the end diastolic volume and the end systolic volume, this difference is how much blood you ejected into your system. Alright, so basically when people have hypertension, something that's going to happen is that because there's a lot of pressure in their vessel, so it's really hard to eject blood into the circulation, and there's a lot of blood coming back from the circulation as well. So both the EDV and the ESV are really high, and there's, as you imagine, if both values increase, it's not going to create a bigger difference, which would be beneficial. It's just, you're still having the same kind of volume ejecting every time to drive the circulation, but it's just because there's a lot of resistance, it's creating a lot of pressure, or there's too much fluid creating a lot of resistance, creating a lot of pressure on your vein. So normally it'll be fine, but this high pressure does causes problem like cardiac dilation and cardiac hypertrophy, which reduces the amount of things that you can hold in your heart as well. And also high blood pressure causes things like atherosclerosis, and can lead into aneurysm, rupture of your of your blood vessel, etc. Right, so it can get quite nasty, and basically something they do is they take these kind of pills to reduce the fluid, so the diuretics to reduce the fluid inside of the blood vessel, so you have both a decrease in your EDV and your ESV. Just gonna show you. So you decrease your EDV and your ESV at the same time. Alright, so other things that we want to be aware of is that the two sound that we actually hear at our heart, the boom boom sound, is actually the shutting of the valves, right? So the first one is the atrioventricular valves shutting against each other. So that's one that's between atria and ventricles. So basically blood going into the ventricles, and the ventricles start to squeeze, and then the valve needs to shut, otherwise it's just going to go back into the atrium, and there's only one way to go, which is into the aorta. And once all the blood is into the aorta, then there's another valve, a unidirectional valve, boom, so that's going to shut, and then the aortic blood won't be able to come back to the ventricles, and basically that creates a second sound. That's why we have the boom 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 boom. And one of the ways to differentiate that is we can actually feel our pulse, because when we feel our pulse, that means there's ejaculation from the aortic valve, which means that's going to happen in between the two valves. So basically the beat that comes before the pulsation in your pulse, that's the AV valve shutting, and the second one that you feel after the pulsation, that's going to be the aortic valve or the semilunar valves, because there's the pulmonary one as well. So that's them shutting together. Right. So that's everything that you actually need to know about the cardiac cycle. And if you have any more questions or you want to know about any more details, feel free to just leave in the comment section below. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. Bye.